in the glittering heart of New York City's underworld, where loyalty is currency and betrayal is a death sentence. The most powerful man was Vincent Costello. Yet, in the center of his opulent ballroom, his own blood was invisible. His son Mateo lived in a silent world of patterns and numbers, ignored by the predators who circled him. They saw a broken heir, a flaw in the Costello legacy. But one night, a simple waitress, an outsider named Clara Reed, saw something else. She sought a lonely soul trapped behind a fortress of silence. And in an act of breathtaking defiance, she would do what no one else dared. She would invite him to dance, igniting a fire that would either save them both or burn the entire Costello empire to the ground. The air in the Costello Grand Ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lies. It was a suffocating perfume, a blend of old-world power and new-world ruthlessness. From her position near the gilded service doors, Clara Reed felt like a ghost observing a feast of sharks. She refilled crystal flutes with champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. Her movements, quiet and precise, honed by months of working for the city's most exclusive catering service. Tonight's event was the pinnacle of that service, Vincent Costello's annual birthday gala, a mandatory celebration for every significant player in the 5 boroughs' shadow economy. Men in bespoke buy-on suits laughed with voices like gravel, their diamond pinky rings catching the light from the 3 colossal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls from the frescoed ceiling. Their wives, draped in couture and dripping with jewels from Harry Winston, exchanged venomous pleasantries, their smiles as sharp as stilettos. It was a dazzling, terrifying spectacle. And Clara's one rule for survival was simple. Be invisible. Keep your head down, your tray steady, and your ears closed. But tonight, her gaze kept snagging on one person who was even more invisible than she was. He sat in a velvet wingback chair in a dimly lit alcove, partially obscured by a marble column. Mateo Costello, the heir to the empire, and its most closely guarded secret. Clara had heard the whispers among the staff. The Don's boy is simple. He's not all there. Damaged goods. They spoke of him with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if his existence was an insult to the brutal perfection of his father's world. He couldn't have been more than 22, with a man of dark, unruly hair that fell over his brow, and the sharp, aristocratic features of his father. But where Vincent Costello's eyes were chips of obsidian calculating and cold, his sons were fixed on the central chandelier with an intensity that seemed to block out the entire cacophonous room. He held a small, polished silver sphere, perhaps a bearing from some machine, rolling it over and over between his thumb and forefinger. His body was perfectly still, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the party. He wasn't participating. He was observing, but not the people. He was observing the light the way it refracted through the thousands of individual crystals, creating a universe of rainbows on the far wall. Clara watched as a wave of guests passed his alcove. None of them acknowledged him. It was a deliberate, practiced ignorance. He was a piece of furniture, a statue to be avoided. A man named Marco Varelli, who Clara recognized as Vincent's ambitious nephew, swaggered past with 2 associates. He cast a sideways glance at Mateo, a sneer twisting his handsome face. "Still counting sparkles, cousin," he muttered, just loud enough for those around him to hear. A cruel chuckle rippled through his group. Mateo didn't flinch. His focus remained unbroken, his thumbs stroking the silver ball in a steady, rhythmic motion. It was as if their words were a frequency he couldn't or wouldn't tune into. But Clara saw it, a subtle tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible increase in the speed of his self-soothing gesture. He heard them. He felt it. Clara Ara's heart ached with a strange, fierce pang of recognition. She knew what it was like to feel out of sync with the world, to be on the outside looking in. As an art student, she spent her days studying light and shadow, finding beauty in the details others overlooked. She saw the geometry in a spider's web, the symphony of colors in a puddle of oil on an asphalt. Looking at Mateo, she didn't see a broken man. She saw someone who was simply processing the world on a different, more profound wavelength. He wasn't ignoring the party. He was absorbing the one part of it that was pure and beautiful, the physics of light. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, materialized at her elbow. "Reed, stop gawking and circulate. Table 7 needs more champagne." "Yes, Miss Albright," Clara Ara murmured, tearing her eyes away from the alcove. She moved through the crowd, her professional smile plastered on her face, but her mind was still on the boy in the chair. She saw the calculated cruelty of Marco Varel, the casual disdain of the guests, the crushing loneliness that seemed to emanate from that quiet corner of the room. This wasn't just a party, it was a performance. And Mateo Costello had been given the role of the ghost at the feast. His own father, Vincent, held court across the room, a titan of industry and fear, never once looking toward his son. It was a public disownment, silent and absolute. Clara Ara finished her rounds, her hands moving on an autopilot. The band shifted from a languid jazz number to a classic waltz. Couples began to drift onto the marble dance floor, a swirling kaleidoscope of silk and tuxedos. The room was alive with movement, with connection with the intricate dance of power and politics. Everyone was dancing. Everyone but the lonely prince in his gilded cage, who was still staring at the light, finding more solace in the predictable patterns of physics than in the chaotic world of men. And in that moment, a reckless, dangerous, and deeply human impulse took root in Clara Ara's heart. She looked at the ignored boy, and for the first time that night, she decided she was tired of being invisible too. The decision settled in Clara Ara's chest, not with a crash, but with a quiet, solid click, like a lock finding its key. It was an insane idea, a career-ending, possibly life-ending idea. Approaching a Costello uninvited was social suicide. Approaching that Costello was an act of madness. But every time she glanced toward the alcove, the sight of Mateo's profound isolation chipped away at her carefully constructed wall of professional detachment. She watched as Marco Varelli, emboldened by champagne, and his own cruelty, made another pass. This time, he stopped leaning against the marble column with a predatory grace. He held up his glass in a mock toast. "To the heir," Marco said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "May your future be as bright as the shiny things that distract you." His cronies snickered. Mateo's hand stilled on the silver sphere. He slowly lowered his gaze from the chandelier, not to look at Marco, but at the polished marble floor. He seemed to shrink into the chair, his shoulders hunching almost imperceptibly. He was a target, and the whole room was complicit in his humiliation through their silence. That was it. The final push. Clara Ara set her empty silver tray on a nearby service stand. She smoothed the front of her simple black uniform, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct for self-preservation renomined at her to turn around, to melt back into the shadows where she belonged. But the image of Mateo's silent endurance was stronger. She walked away from the wall, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug that bordered the dance floor. With every step, she felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes. The servant girl was moving not with a tray, but with a purpose. A low murmur rippled through the nearest clusters of guests. She ignored them. She ignored the warning glare from Ms. Albright across the room. She ignored the cold knot of fear in her stomach. Her world narrowed to the velvet wingback chair and the man who occupied it. As she drew closer, she could see the finer details, the faint tremor in his hand, the way his knuckles were white from his grip on the silver ball. He was wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it looked like a costume, something he'd been forced into. His gaze was still fixed downward, studying the intricate veining in the marble. She stopped a few feet from his chair. She didn't speak words. She sensed would be an intrusion, a clumsy tool for what needed to be communicated. Instead, she followed his gaze, looking down at the floor. "It's Florentine marble," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The patterns are caused by mineral impurities. Iron oxides make the red swirls and chlorite makes the green. It's like a map of the Earth's pressure over millions of years." Mateo's head tilted a fraction of an inch. It was the first sign of acknowledgement she'd received. He didn't look at her, but his attention had shifted. He was listening. Encouraged, she took another small step. She looked up at the chandelier that had captivated him for so long. "They're Swarovski crystals." She continued, her voice soft and steady. "Each one is cut with at least 14 facets. It's the precision of the angles that creates the spectral dispersion. A rainbow from a single beam of light. It's beautiful." He finally slowly lifted his head. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, flickered toward her face for a single fleeting second before darting away to a point just over her shoulder. It was the briefest of connections, but it felt like a jolt of electricity. He understood. She wasn't mocking him. She was joining him. She was speaking his language. The waltz swelled around them, a river of sound. They were standing beside. Clara took a deep breath, the point of no return. She extended her hand. Her palm was up, an open, simple offering. She didn't say, "Would you like to dance?" She didn't say anything at all. The invitation was in the gesture itself, a silent question posed in a language of pure intent. Time seemed to slow down. A hush fell over the immediate area as people realized what was happening. The waitress and the broken heir. It was a tableau of impossibility. Marco Varley's sneer froze on his face, replaced by disbelief, then fury. Across the room, Vincent Costello, who had been deep in conversation with a federal judge, turned his head, his black eyes narrowing to slits. He saw the girl in the black uniform, her hand outstretched to his son. Mateo stared at her hand. He looked from her palm to her face, his gaze still not quite meeting hers, but assessing, questioning. His own hand, the one clutching the silver sphere, trembled slightly. For a long, agonizing moment, Clara thought he would refuse, that she had made a terrible, humiliating mistake. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he uncalled his fingers. The silver ball dropped silently onto the plush velvet of the chair. He looked at his own empty hand, then back at hers, and he reached out. His fingers were long and cool as they brushed against hers. His touch was hesitant, tentative, but he placed his hand in hers. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Clara's smile was small and genuine. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze and began to lead him out of the alcove toward the edge of the swirling dance floor. He moved stiffly, at first, his steps uncertain. His eyes were wide, taking in the dizzying motion of the dancers, the overwhelming sensory input of the music and the crowd. She guided him to a small, open space. She placed his other hand on her waist, the fabric of her uniform a thin barrier between them. She rested her hand on his shoulder. It was a classic waltz position, but it felt revolutionary. "Just follow me," she whispered, her voice for him alone. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's just a pattern like the crystals. He looked down at their feet. He was processing it. The movement, the rhythm, the proximity. For a few clumsy steps, they were out of sync. But then something clicked. He found the pattern. 1, 2, 3. His movements became less rigid, more fluid. He was still looking at their feet, not at her, but he was with her. He was dancing. They weren't graceful. They weren't the dazzling couple in the center of the floor. But they were the only two people anyone was watching the ignored boy and the invisible girl turning in a slow, awkward, and utterly mesmerizing circle. Clara Reed finally dared to look up past Mateo's shoulder. She saw a sea of stunned faces. She saw the purple rage on Marco Varelli's face, and she saw Vincent Costello standing perfectly still, his expression unreadable, a statue of cold, calculating power. His eyes were locked on them. And in their depths, Clara Reed couldn't tell if she saw the spark of a death sentence, or something even more terrifying. The glint of interest. The waltz ended. The final chord hung in the air, thick with a tension that hadn't been there 3 minutes earlier. As the applause for the band started, a wave of frenzied whispers washed over the room, crashing against Clara Reed and Mateo, where they stood on the edge of the dance floor. Mateo immediately dropped his hands and took a half step back, his brief connection to the world severed. The noise, the stares, it was too much. His gaze darted around the room, a cornered animal seeking an escape. He fumbled in his pocket, retrieving the silver sphere, and the rhythmic stroking of his thumb against the cool metal began at once. "It's okay," Clara Reed said softly, instinctively, wanting to shield him from the sudden onslaught of attention. But it was too late. A path was clearing through the crowd, and walking down it was Miss Albright, her face a mask of cold fury. "Read my office now." She hissed, her voice low and sharp. She didn't spare a glance for Mateo. Clara Reed's heart sank. She gave Mateo one last, worried look, but he was already retreating into himself, his eyes fixed on a distant point. She had brought the storm to him, and now she had to go face the lightning. She followed her supervisor off the main floor, feeling the daggers of 100 glares on her back. The office was a small, functional room backstage. The moment the door clicked shut, Ms. Albright whirled on her. "Are you out of your mind?" She began, her voice shaking with rage. "What in God's name did you think you were doing? You are here to be invisible. You are here to serve, not to create a spectacle. You don't just approach a man like that, especially not that man." He looked lonely. Clara Reed said, her own voice barely a whisper. It sounded so foolish, so naive when spoken aloud in the face of such fury. Lonely Miss Albright let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "That is the son of Vincent Costello. He is not lonely. He is a liability, an embarrassment that his father is forced to display once a year. Your job is not to play savior to the broken toys of powerful men. Your job is to pour champagne and not get noticed. You have failed on all counts. Pack your things. You're fired." The words hit Clara Reed like a physical blow. Fired. Of course. What had she expected? A promotion. She had broken the cardinal rule. She had been seen. But no. There are no buts. You are a liability to my business. Men like the Costello do not tolerate unpredictability. You were a variable they couldn't control. That makes you dangerous. Now get out. Dejected Clara Reed turned to leave, the weight of her foolish, impulsive act crushing her. But as her hand touched the door knob, a sharp knock echoed from the other side. Ms. Albright froze, her eyes widening in alarm. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice suddenly strained. The door opened without an invitation. Standing in the doorway was a man built like a refrigerator, wearing a suit so finely tailored it couldn't conceal the raw muscle beneath. His name was Roman, And Clara recognized him as Vincent Costello's personal bodyguard and right-hand man. His face was a stoic mask of granite. "Mr. Costello wants to see the girl," Roman said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't asking. Ms. Albright paused, looking from the terrifying man to Clara. The fury in her eyes was replaced by sheer panic. This was infinitely worse than a simple staff disciplinary issue. This had escalated. "Of course," Ms. Albright stammered. "Reed, you will go with him." The unspoken message was clear, "and you will fix whatever damage you've done." Clara's fear, which had been a cold knot, now blossomed into ice-water dread. She was being summoned by the devil himself. Roman gestured with his head, and she numbly followed him out of the office, leaving a shocked Miss Albright behind. He led her not back to the ballroom, but down a private wood-paneled hallway to a heavy oak door. He knocked once, then opened it, ushering her inside before closing it softly behind her, leaving her alone with the most feared man in the city. Vincent Costello's private study was the antithesis of the garish ballroom. It was a room of dark wood, leather-bound books, and quiet power. The only light came from a green banker's lamp on a massive mahogany desk. Vincent sat behind it, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The overpowering scent of lies was replaced by the clean, sharp smell of scotch and old paper. He didn't speak for a full minute, simply watching her, his eyes appraising her from across the vast desk. Clara stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, feeling like an insect under a microscope. "Clara Reed," he said finally. His voice was calm, measured, but it held an undercurrent of menace that vibrated in the silent room. "Art history student at Columbia, top of your class. Your father was a professor there, died 5 years ago. Your mother lives in a nursing home upstate. You work 2 jobs to pay for her care and your tuition. You have no criminal record, no debts to anyone of consequence, and no known affiliations with my competitors." Clara's blood ran cold. He had her entire life summarized in a paragraph. He knew everything. "Why?" he asked, swirling the scotch in his glass. "Why did you approach my son?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. He looked isolated. Vincent let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Isolated? You saw the Don's broken son, and your heart bled for him. Is that the story you want me to believe? It's the truth. People do not approach my family out of pity," he said, his voice dropping, becoming harder. "They approach my family for money, for power, or because they were sent by my enemies to find a weakness. So I will ask you again, who sent you?" "What do you want?" "No one sent me," Clara insisted, finding a sliver of courage. "And I don't want anything. I just saw someone who was being treated cruelly, and I acted." He leaned forward, the lamp casting his face in harsh shadows. "You think my nephew is cruel. Marco is a predator. That is his nature. That is what is required in my world. My son Mateo is different. He is brilliant with numbers, with patterns. He can see the flaw in any system. But he cannot look a man in the eye and lie. He cannot project strength when he feels fear. In our world, that makes him a target. What you did tonight, you painted an even bigger target on his back. You highlighted his weakness. You made him the center of a pathetic circus act. I don't think he's weak." Clara said the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I think he just sees the world differently. The way he was watching the light, the way he understood what I said about the marble. That's not weakness. It's focus." Vincent stared at her, his expression unreadable. He took a slow sip of his scotch. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. You are either the most naive girl in New York City, he said slowly, or the most gifted liar I have ever met. Either way, you are dangerous. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand before her. He was shorter than she expected, but his presence was immense, radiating an aura of absolute control. You will not speak to my son again, he commanded. You will not come near him. You will forget this night ever happened. Ms. Albright will not be firing you. It would draw too much attention. You will finish your shift and you will go home. But be assured, Miss Reed, we will be watching you. If you deviate from your simple life in any way, if you so much as breathe in the direction of my family again, I will personally tear your world apart, starting with that quiet little nursing home upstate. The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it was more terrifying than any shout. It was a promise. Do you understand me? He asked. Clara could only nod, her entire body trembling. Good, he said, turning his back on her. Roman will show you out. As she was led away, her mind reeling, a final warning came not from Vincent, but from the man who had been a silent observer of the whole affair. As she passed the entrance to the ballroom, Marco Varley stepped into her path, blocking her way. His charming smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure venom. I don't know what your game is, he whispered, his voice a silky threat. But the old man might be intrigued by your little charity act. I'm not. Stay away from him. Teo is a dead end, a glitch in the system, and I don't like glitches. He brushed past her, and Clara fled into the night, the twin warnings of a king and a jackal echoing in her ears. She had danced with the forgotten prince, and in doing so, had invited the monsters to her door. For 2 weeks, Clara lived by Vincent Costello's rules. She threw herself into her studies, picked up extra shifts at a diner a world away from gilded ballrooms, and tried desperately to scrub the memory of the gala from her mind. But it was impossible. The memory of Mateo's hesitant touch, the silent communication they had shared, was imprinted on her, and the fear of his father's threat was a constant cold companion. She jumped every time the phone rang and saw shadows in every corner. She was being watched. She knew it. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the devil came calling again. Roman Vincent Costello's hulking bodyguard was waiting for her outside her art history lecture. He wasn't threatening, just present. An immovable object in the middle of a bustling university campus. Ms. Reed, he rumbled. Mr. Costello requires your services. Clara's heart seized. My services, I'm not a caterer anymore. Miss Albright let me go the day after the party. So the promise not to have her fired had been a lie. Not those services, Roman said unfazed. He has a proposition for you, a job. The car is this way. It wasn't a request. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew there was nowhere to go. Vincent Costello's reach was absolute. Defeated, she followed him to a black sedan with tinted windows, the kind of car that screamed money and anonymity. The drive was silent and took them to a part of the city she had never seen, a private gated community of stately brownstones in Brooklyn Heights overlooking the East River. Roman led her into one of the homes. It was not the opulent mansion she expected, but a tastefully decorated modern house filled with light and art. This, she realized, was not Vincent's home. In the living room, surrounded by shelves of books on mathematics, engineering, and art, sat Mateo. He was sketching furiously in a large leather-bound book, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up when they entered. Vincent Costello emerged from a connecting room. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, a deliberate departure from his intimidating gala attire. Ms. Reed, he said coolly. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have much of a choice," Clara retorted, her fear momentarily eclipsed by resentment. A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed Vincent's face. "No, you did not. I have a problem, and I believe you might be the unconventional solution." He gestured toward his son. "Mate has not been the same since the night of the gala. He is more withdrawn, more agitated. His routines are disrupted. He has filled 3 sketchbooks with drawings of crystal chandeliers and the patterns of Florentine marble." Vincent walked over to a table and picked up one of the sketchbooks, opening it for her. The pages were filled with breathtakingly intricate drawings. They weren't just sketches. They were mathematical dissections of light, geometric proofs of beauty. He had deconstructed the chandelier into its core components, mapping the trajectory of every refracted beam. "His tutors and therapists are useless." Vincent continued, his voice laced with a frustration that sounded almost like pain. "They try to force him into their world. For 3 minutes, you entered his." Clara stared at the drawings, mesmerized. "He's not just drawing it. He's analyzing it. He's trying to understand it. He understands it perfectly." Vincent corrected her. "He is trying to communicate, and I do not speak the language." He closed the book. "That is where you come in. I want to hire you." "Hire me to do what?" she asked, bewildered. "I am one of the world's foremost private collectors of Russian imperial Faber eggs," he stated as if discussing the weather. "My collection is poorly documented. I require an art history specialist to catalog it. Provenance, materials, historical context. You will work here 3 days a week. The pay will be enough to take care of your mother's expenses for the next 10 years. Clara's mind reeled. The money was life-changing, but she knew the eggs were a pretense, a lie. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could hire any art historian in the world." "Because the collection is housed here," Vincent said, his gaze flicking to his son. "And Mateo is fascinated by them, their mechanics, their geometric perfection. You will be cataloging the eggs, and you will be near him. You will talk to him not about the weather or social niceties. You will talk to him about patterns, about art, about facets and light, about things you seem to understand." It was a test and a trap. He was using her to get to his son, and in doing so, he was binding her to his dangerous world. He was dangling the solution to all her financial problems in front of her, but the price was her freedom and her safety. Marco's venomous warning echoed in her ears. "What if I say no?" Clara asked. Vincent gave her a thin, cold smile. "I would strongly advise against it. This is not a request, Ms. Reed. It is an arrangement, one that will benefit us all." She looked over at Mateo, who had still not acknowledged her presence. He was lost in his world of lines and angles, the world that his father was willing to pay a fortune to get a glimpse into. The memory of his loneliness at the gala, the brief, stunning moment of connection on the dance floor. It all came rushing back. Maybe this was a chance, not just to help her mother, but to help him, to give him a voice. "Okay," she said, her voice small but firm. "I'll do it." The first few days were a study in silent observation. Clara was given a workspace in the large sunlit library where Mateo spent most of his time. A priceless Faber egg. The rose trellis egg was placed on a velvet cushion on her desk. Mateo sat at his own table across the room sketching. He never spoke to her, never looked at her, but Clara was acutely aware of him. She could feel his awareness of her, a subtle energy in the quiet room. She didn't force conversation. Instead, she worked, speaking her thoughts aloud in a soft monologue. It was made in 1907 by Henrik Wigström, she murmured, examining the egg through a magnifying glass. The shell is translucent, pale green enamel, latticed with rose-cut diamonds. The roses are opaque pink and white enamel with emerald green leaves. It's a perfect system. The geometry of the trellis is flawless. She talked about the history, the artistry, the mechanics of the surprise hidden within it. She spoke his language. On the third day, as she was describing the intricate clockwork of another egg, a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up. Mateo was standing there, his own sketchbook in hand. He still wouldn't meet her eyes, but he placed the book on her desk open to a specific page. On it was a drawing not of the egg, but of its internal mechanism. He had drawn it from memory, from simply watching her handle it. But he had improved it. His sketch showed a more efficient gear system, a more elegant arrangement of levers that would make the surprise, a tiny diamond-studded bird, move more fluidly. Clara gasped. This is brilliant. Mateo pointed a single finger at a gear in his drawing, then at the egg. He looked at her, his gray eyes meeting hers for a full 2 seconds. It was a question, a design flaw. He had noticed. You're right, she breathed, understanding completely. The torque on that pinion is uneven. It would cause wear over time. Your design, it corrects the floor. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Mateo's mouth. He didn't speak a word, but he had communicated perfectly. He had shared a piece of his world with her. From that day on, their sessions took on a new rhythm. Clara would describe the art and history, and Mateo would respond in his sketchbook, deconstructing, analyzing, and improving upon the work of master craftsmen. They built a bridge between them, not with words, but with shared diagrams, with the mutual appreciation of a perfect system. She learned his tales. When he was getting overwhelmed by a sound from the street, he would tap his fingers in a prime number sequence. When he was calm and focused, he would hum a low, singled note. She learned that he hated the smell of bleach and loved the texture of velvet. He in turn began to emerge from his shell. He would occasionally offer her a cup of tea, a silent gesture of comfort. He started leaving her sketches that had nothing to do with the eggs. Incredibly detailed drawings of her face, her hands the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. He saw her with the same intensity he saw everything else. Their trust was a fragile geometric thing they were building together piece by piece. But Clara was not naive. She knew that Vincent was watching from a distance through Roman or security cameras, and she knew that in a world built on violence and betrayal, a beautiful, perfect system was often the first thing to be broken. The trust between Clara and Mateo solidified in the quiet sanctuary of the Brooklyn brownstone. Vincent Costello kept his distance, receiving Roman's curt daily reports with a grunt of what could have been satisfaction. For the first time, he felt a sliver of hope for his son, a possibility that Mateo could find a way to navigate the world. This hope made Vincent careless. It made him lower his guard, even if only by an inch. His nephew Marco Varel noticed. Marco saw the new arrangement not as a breakthrough, but as a consolidation of power around the last person he wanted to see empowered. Mateo, the idiot savant, and his pet art student were becoming a factor, a variable in his own meticulous plans to inherit the Costello empire. He knew that Vincent's one true weakness was his son. If Mateo were to become in any way competent or influential, Marco's path to the throne would be blocked. He decided it was time to remove the glitch in the system permanently. The opportunity came during a high-stakes meeting Vincent had scheduled at a neutral location, a private suite at the old Kellerman Hotel in Midtown. The meeting was with a rival family, the Falconys, to negotiate new territory boundaries. These meetings were always tense, a razor's edge between a handshake and a bloodbath. Vincent, in a move that stunned his inner circle, decided to bring Mateo. He needs to see how this world works. Vincent had told a skeptical Roman. He can sit in the corner. He needs to be exposed to it. Clara Reed, who was at the brownstone when the decision was made, felt a chill of dread. "That's a terrible idea," she said to Vincent, overstepping her bounds. "The noise, the tension, the unfamiliar faces. It will be a sensory nightmare for him." "He will be with me." Vincent had snapped his authority absolute. "He is my son. He will learn." What Vincent didn't know was that Marco had a man on the Falcone side. He also had a man on the hotel's security team. He had engineered a plan that was both brutal and brilliant. It wouldn't look like an internal hit. It would look like negotiations gone wrong. A classic mob shootout. In the ensuing chaos, a stray bullet would find the unfortunate disabled son, a tragic casualty of a deal gone bad. Vincent would be devastated. The Falcones would be blamed. A war would likely start. And in the ensuing turmoil, Marco would be perfectly positioned to rise as the strong, steady hand the family needed. The suite at the Kellerman was opulent and suffocating. Thick velvet curtains blocked the afternoon sun, and the air was stale with the smell of cigar smoke. Mateo, dressed once again in a restrictive suit, was visibly distressed. He sat in a chair against the wall, as far from the central table as possible. His hands clenched, his eyes wide and scanning every detail of the room. Clara Reed had insisted on giving him something before he left. A small, intricate puzzle box made of polished mahogany. "Focus on the lines," she'd told him, her voice low and reassuring. "Find the pattern. It will keep you grounded." Now, in the hotel suite, his fingers traced the geometric patterns of the box over and over, his only anchor in a sea of overwhelming stimuli. Vincent, Don Falcone, and their respective counsels sat at the table, their voices low and dangerous. Marco stood behind his uncle, the picture of loyal support, his eyes occasionally flicking towards Mateo with cold anticipation. The negotiations grew heated. Voices were raised. The tension in the room became a physical presence. Mateo began to rock almost imperceptibly in his chair, the puzzle box a blur of motion in his hands. He wasn't listening to the words. The words were just noise, aggressive and chaotic. Instead, his unique mind was doing what it always did, processing sensory data, identifying patterns, and noticing anomalies. He noticed the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet in the adjoining bathroom. Drip, 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 drip. The pattern was off. He noticed the way the light from the hallway under the door glinted off the polished shoes of the two Falcone men standing guard outside. Their shoes were identical, but one man every 30 seconds shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. The other stood perfectly still and in balance. He noticed a high-frequency hum coming from one of the decorative lamps on a side table. It was a sound most people would have tuned out, but to his sensitive ears it was a piercing whine. The lamp was a transmitter, and then he saw it. The detail that broke the pattern. Marco, standing behind Vincent, reached into his jacket to pull out a handkerchief, dabbing at a non-existent bead of sweat on his brow. As he did, his jacket fell open for a fraction of a second. Pinned to the inside of his lapel was a small, almost invisible pin. It was a tiny, stylized silver falcon, the symbol of the Falcone family. Why was a Costello wearing the symbol of their rival? It was a logical impossibility, a fatal flaw in the system. At that exact moment, Mateo's brain connected the data points. The broken faucet rhythm was a signal. The weight-shifting guard was nervous. The transmitter was for communication, and the falcon pin was a sign of allegiance. It was a trap. The man outside the door with the still feet was about to move. Mateo knew it with absolute certainty. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't have the words, and there wasn't time. He reacted with a strangled cry. He lunged forward from his chair, not at his father, not at the Falconys. He threw himself at the side table with the humming lamp, shoving it with all his might. The heavy marble and brass lamp crashed to the floor, shattering the bulb and cutting the transmission. Simultaneously, he kicked the leg of the heavy mahogany negotiating table. It was all anyone saw, the sun having a violent, inexplicable fit. Mateo, what the hell? Vincent roared, half rising from his seat. Marco's face was a mask of fury and confusion. This was not part of the plan, but Mateo's seemingly random act of destruction had a cascading effect. The crashing lamp startled the men at the table. His kick, aimed with an intuitive understanding of physics, caused the table's heavy top to tilt violently. Scotch glasses and ashtrays slid to one side, crashing into Don Falcone's lap. The moment of chaos was all it took. The doors to the suite burst open. The Falcone men, including the one with the shifting feet, rushed in, guns drawn, but their plan was ruined. Instead of finding the Costello men sitting like ducks, they found a scene of utter confusion. Don Falcone was sputtering, covered in scotch. Vincent and Roman were already on their feet, drawing their own weapons. The element of surprise was gone. The still-footed man, who was supposed to be Marco's inside man from the Falcone side, hesitated for a split second, his gun aimed not at Vincent, but at the space where Mateo had been. In that moment of hesitation, Roman fired twice. The man dropped. The firefight was brutal, deafening, and short. When the smoke cleared, the Falcone men were down, and Don Falcone was nursing a wound in his shoulder, swearing vengeance. In the ringing silence, everyone stared at the cause of the chaos. Mateo was huddled on the floor, his hands over his ears, shaking violently. He had saved them all, and no one understood how. Vincent rushed to his son's side, his face a mixture of anger, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying realization. "Mateo, what did you see?" Mateo couldn't answer. He just rocked back and forth, his eyes squeezed shut. But Marco knew as he helped his uncle to his feet, feigning concern. Their eyes met over Mateo's shaking form. Marco's face was a carefully controlled mask of worry, but his eyes held a cold, murderous fury. The glitch in the system hadn't just survived. It had foiled him. He had underestimated the broken boy, and it was a mistake he would not make twice. The aftermath of the Kellerman Hotel shootout was a tightly controlled explosion. Don Falcone declared war, claiming Vincent had set a trap. Vincent, in turn, declared Falcone a treacherous snake. The New York underworld simmered on the brink of boiling over. But within the Costello inner circle, there was only one question whispered in hushed, fearful tones. What did Mateo know Vincent brought his son back to the Brooklyn brownstone, which was now more of a fortress than a home? Roman and a team of guards secured the perimeter. Mateo was in a state of sensory shutdown, refusing to leave his room, refusing to speak or even look at anyone. The violent chaos of the shootout had shattered the fragile peace he and Clara Reed had built. Vincent, desperate and out of options, summoned Clara Reed. "He won't respond." Vincent set his voice roar with a fear she had never heard from him before. He looked tired, older. The doctors gave him a sedative. It did nothing. He just sits there rocking. "He saved my life." "I know he did, but I don't know how. I need you to talk to him." "He doesn't need a conversation," Clara Reed said, walking past him toward Mateo's room. "He needs to feel safe." She found Mateo on the floor in the corner of his room, his knees drawn to his chest, his head down. His treasured puzzle box lay untouched beside him. Clara didn't speak. She simply sat on the floor a few feet away, mirroring his posture entering his space without intruding on it. For an hour, they sat in complete silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice a low murmur. It was the sound, wasn't it? It was too loud, a barely perceptible nod. Too many people, two patterns, all broken. She continued. Another nod, more definite this time. Slowly, carefully, she pushed a blank sketchbook and a charcoal pencil across the floor until they were within his reach. "Show me the pattern," she whispered. "Show me the floor." For a long time, he did nothing. Then his hand snaked out his long fingers, wrapping around the pencil. He pulled the sketchbook closer, and he began to draw. He didn't draw faces or guns. He drew schematics. He drew a diagram of the hotel room with arrows indicating sight lines and positions. He drew sound waves labeling the frequency of the humming lamp and the arrhythmic pattern of the dripping faucet. He drew a vector analysis of his own movements, the lunge, the shove, the kick, showing how they were the most efficient actions to create maximum disruption in minimum time. It was the testimony of a physicist, not a victim. Vincent and Roman watched from the doorway, utterly bewildered by the cascade of lines and numbers filling the page. "It's gibberish," Roman muttered. "No," Clara said, her eyes wide with understanding. "It's everything." She pointed to a small, detailed drawing in the corner of the page. "What's this tio?" Mateo's pencil moved, sketching the object again from another angle. It was the pin from Marco's lapel. He then drew the pin next to a perfect rendering of the Falcone family crest. The connection was undeniable. Vincent stared at the drawing, his face turning to stone. "Marco," he breathed the name and not of disbelief and betrayal. "No, it's not possible. He's my blood. My brother's son. The pattern doesn't lie," Clara said softly, looking at the intricate web of evidence Mateo had laid out. He noticed things no one else would. The pin, the nervous guard, the transmitter. He saw the whole trap because he wasn't listening to the lies being spoken at the table. He was observing the truth all around it. The full weight of the betrayal crashed down on Vincent. Marco, his trusted nephew, the son he never had tried to have him killed and use his own son's death as a pretext for war. It was a plan of such monstrous cunning, it was almost perfect. It had failed only because of the one person Marco had discounted completely. "Bring Marco to me," Vincent said to Roman, his voice now dangerously calm. "Here now, and tell him to come alone." An hour later, Marco Varelli strode into the Brownstones' library, a look of performative concern on his face. "Uncle, I came as soon as I heard. How is Tao? I was so worried when he had his episode." Vincent was standing by the fireplace, his back to the room. Mateo's sketchbook was open on the mantelpiece. "He is recovering," Vincent said, his voice flat. "It was a miracle you both got out of there alive." Marco continued, oozing sympathy. "The Falcones are animals. We must strike back hard and fast. I have our men ready. We will burn their entire organization to the ground for what they did." "What they did," Vincent repeated, turning around slowly. His eyes were like black ice. "It's interesting. Tio remembers things in pictures." He tapped the sketchbook. He drew the room. He drew the guards. He drew the lamp. And he drew this. Vincent picked up the book and showed Marco the drawing of the falcon pin. Marco's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic in his eyes before it was expertly suppressed. "A pin, Uncle." The boy is confused. He was terrified. He's not a reliable witness. "But you are, aren't you?" "Marco," Vincent said, taking a step closer. "You are reliable, loyal, Always. Marco said, his voice firm. I live to serve you and this family. Then you won't mind showing me what you have pinned to the inside of your lapel right now. The color drained from Marco's face. His carefully constructed world crumbled in that single sentence. His hand instinctively went to his chest. He was still wearing the same suit from the hotel in his arrogance, in his certainty that no one could have possibly seen it. He had forgotten to remove it. It was a fatal oversight. This is insane, Marco stammered, taking a step back. You're taking the word over mine. It was the wrong word to use. The slap was so fast, so vicious, that Marco didn't see it coming. The crack of Vincent's hand across his nephew's face echoed in the silent room. Marco stumbled back, a red handprint blooming on his cheek. He is my son! Vincent snarled his voice, a low, terrifying growl. And he is smarter than you will ever be. He sees the world as it is, Marco, a series of patterns. And you are a flaw in the pattern, a corruption that must be removed. Marco's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. He saw Roman blocking the door, his expression impassive. He saw Clara standing near the entrance to Mateo's room, her face pale, but resolute. And in that moment, the library door opened. Mateo stood there. He was no longer shaking. He was calm, his gray eyes fixed on his cousin. He held the mahogany puzzle box in his hands. He looked at Marco, and then he looked at his father. For the first time in his life, he spoke a full, clear sentence to him. You fix the floor, he said, his voice quiet but steady, or the whole system breaks. It was a judgment, a verdict, and for Vincent Costello it was the only one that mattered. He looked from his son, his brilliant, unexpected, powerful son, to the nephew who had betrayed him. The choice was clear. Roman Vincent said, his voice cold as the grave. Take my nephew downstairs. We have some family business to discuss. Marco lunged, a desperate wild animal, but Roman was faster. He subdued him with brutal efficiency, dragging him from the room. Marco's shouts and threats echoed up the stairs before being silenced by the heavy thud of a basement door. The unmasking was complete. The house was finally clean. The silence after Marco's removal was profound. Vincent Costello saw his world rebuilt, not through violence, but through a charcoal drawing. Mateo presented a schematic for a new dynasty. Vincent's strength and his own analytical mind, linked by interlocking gears, bridged by Clara Reed. The empire was quietly remade. Mateo became its secret weapon, a silent analyst who identified threats through the pure logic of patterns. He was the mind. Vincent remained the hand. Clara was the essential interpreter, her future secured by a grateful dawn. She was Mateo's partner and anchor, helping him flourish in a world that once terrified him. Months later, he led her in a waltz in their quiet library. They moved in perfect sync, no longer an awkward spectacle, but a seamless system. He met her gaze, a genuine smile on his face. The pattern is perfect, he said. Their bond was not one of passion, but of a new kind of power forged in the unshakable geometry of trust. Their story reminds us that true strength isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's found in the quietest corners in the minds that see the world in a way no one else can. Mateo's perceived weakness was his greatest weapon, and Clara's simple act of kindness was more powerful than any gangster's threat. They didn't just find love. They built a new world together, one based on understanding and acceptance in the face of judgment. Their dance was just the beginning, a silent promise that even in the most dangerous of empires, a new and better system can be born from seeing the beauty that everyone else chose to ignore. What did you think of Mateo's incredible hidden strength and Clara Ara's courage? Let me know in the comments below. If their story of unexpected connection moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a story where the true hero is the one nobody saw coming. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss another journey into a world of drama twists and unforgettable love. Thank you for listening.